Now, I have met with Minister Wilson-Raybould a couple of times already since arriving in BC yesterday. We spoke about our shared goals for our country and for this government. She confirmed for me a conversation we had this fall where I told her directly that any decisions on matters involving the Director of Public Prosecutions were hers alone. I respect her view that due to privilege, she cannot comment or add on matters recently before the media. And I also highlight that we're bound by cabinet confidentiality. In our system of government, of course, her presence in cabinet should actually speak for itself.
Well, that was Justin Trudeau yesterday saying, well, look, the fact that Jody Wilson-Raybould, who I allegedly fired, according to the Globe and Mail, the fact that she's still a loyal cabinet minister, that tells you everything you need to know. She's totally behind me. Well, today, Jody Wilson-Raybould quit cabinet, sending shockwaves through the entire political system, I would say. Let me quote two lines from it. Dear Prime Minister, with a heavy heart, I am writing to tender my resignation as the Minister of Veterans Affairs and Associate Minister of National Defense. And let me skip down about 2/3 of the way down. She says, I am aware that many Canadians wish for me to speak on matters that have been in the media over the last week. I'm in the process of obtaining advice on the topics that I am legally permitted to discuss in this matter, and as such have retained the Honourable Thomas Albert Cromwell, CC, as counsel. And just one last point, she signs it Puglas, that is her Aboriginal name, above her English name, Jody Wilson-Raybould. That is a fighting document. The fact that she's retained a former Supreme Court judge to give her advice, to tell her what to do and how to talk about this is very interesting to me. There are real questions about whether or not she actually has solicitor-client privilege on this matter that she has to submit to. Justin Trudeau, of course, could waive any such privilege and say, oh, you're free to talk, I release you from that, but he won't. The government's in a panic. As we record this, Trudeau has already delayed his press conference today several times, getting his ducks in a row, I imagine. The crisis is spreading, and joining us now is someone who I think is uniquely positioned to talk about this. Let me just tell you his biography. You'll guess who I'm talking about. Former lawyer to a prime minister, former boss of a national law firm, someone who knows law and politics and where they overlap. I'm talking about our friend Manny Montenegrino, the boss of Think Sharp, who joined us now via Skype from Ottawa. Holy cow, Manny, what a challenge Trudeau has gotten himself in. I'm just for 1 second before we get into it, if you were his lawyer, and I know you never would be, but you were the lawyer to the other prime minister, if you were Trudeau's lawyer, what would your simplest advice to him be?
I'd say to Justin Trudeau, what do you think you should do? And whatever he said, I'd say do the opposite.
Manny, come on.
All right. Let's get serious. Here's what's there is so much in this discussion that we're going to have. What the Prime Minister did yesterday was egregious. Here he is. He's protected by solicitor-client privilege, yet goes out and speaks not only for himself, but tries to speak for the once Attorney General. I mean, that is egregious. If you have solicitor-client privilege, don't speak. Do not. So he sat there and purported to speak for her. That must have outraged. And then he gave two veil warnings to her. You're caught by cabinet confidentiality and you're caught by solicitor-client. So you do not speak. What does she do the next day? She resigns from cabinet, so she has no cabinet responsibility or confidentiality, and she retains a top judge of the Supreme Court who's retired to give her advice to speak. That's what she's done. And it is incredible that the Prime Minister would have so much arrogance to treat the independent Attorney General who's there to protect the justice of all Canadians. I mean, Ezra, we've had the Canadian Bar Association. We've had the Civil Liberties Union. We've had every lawyer say what he has done is wrong. And he's taking on Canada's justice system. And thank God we have our ex-Attorney General that sees fit to put the justice system. And I find it ironic that an Indigenous woman is protecting our justice system, which stems back to common law, England. And there she is protecting for all Canadians our justice system against a privileged prime minister who hides behind his privilege. Now, Ezra, there are more and more terrible things about this file. We have the new Attorney General that won't even interview the past Attorney General who's been so courageous. He won't even interview her. Yeah. We have the ethics commissioner just seeing enough information to set up an investigation. Yet the new Attorney General, David Lametti, won't even interview anybody in this crisis. He's not upholding his duties as Attorney General. We have the Prime Minister who's been found guilty 5 times by an ethics commissioner, which is a judge, virtually a judge. It's a judicial, a quasi-judicial body, 5 times as being, and very, very important breaches. One of them is he failed to recuse himself. The Prime Minister was found guilty for failing to recuse himself, i.e. not having the judgment to walk away from a conflict situation. And that's similar to what he's doing at the PMO, or the accusations that he's doing. He was found by the ethics commissioner to be credible. Now that is the first time in history a prime minister was found not to be credible by a judicial officer. Now we know what not credible means. The judge thinks they lied. That was on the issue of he's a friend. The Aga Khan was a friend. Well, that was his excuse. A judge said, no, I don't take your word. Yeah. And when you have a judge saying that, or a judicial officer saying that, and then you have the Attorney General believing every word that the Prime Minister is saying and will not investigate, when there's evidence that he was found not to be truthful by another jurist, it's frightening.
Manny, you've said so many things. I've been taking some notes.
Sure.
Can I unpack a few of these different things?
Sure.
Because each one of them is a devastating point. And we haven't even talked about what was said in Atlantic Canada yesterday in the trial of the suspended Vice Admiral Mark Norman. And I guess that's another point. But let me ask you about solicitor-client privilege. As I described it yesterday, it's sort of like when you go confess something to a priest or tell something to your doctor. There's sort of a privilege about that's a deep secret that the priest can say, oh, I'm not going to tell anyone. And that's what solicitor-client privilege is. It's on an occasion of, because public policy is you want people to be able to have very candid conversations, even if it's embarrassing. You want them to know it's secret. But isn't one of the rules, I mean, I'm a former lawyer myself, Manny. Obviously, I didn't have as much practice as you. But isn't one of the things about solicitor-client privilege is if the client, which in this case presumably is Trudeau, if he starts to blab about what was discussed, that waives or voids the privilege. So if he said, well, I can't tell you what we discussed, it was super secret, and if he would stop there, that's one thing. But then if he says, oh, and it was great, and we said this, and we said that, that's waived, and now there's no more privilege. Am I right legally in that, Manny?
I think, yes, you are right. I mean, privilege, first of all, there's a whole question whether there is a solicitor-client privilege between the Attorney General exercising her duty and whoever. The Prime Minister is not her client. Right. I will certainly say this, where these discussions were happening were the Prime Minister's office. There were at least 10 people in that room. Right. They don't enjoy privilege. I do not know why, the new attorney general or anyone else or the media is not interviewing these 10 people, they don't enjoy privilege. They never retain the attorney general.
Right.
So they are PMO staffers, each one of them. The RCMP should be walking in and asking questions, because this is about the most serious allegation you can have, which is obstruction of justice. Right. They don't enjoy privilege. Whether the prime minister enjoys privilege, that's questionable. There are other attorney generals that have said no. There's no privilege. The attorney general's responsibility is to the crown. It isn't to a particular person. Right. And so I think, and that is why she has, I believe that she has received a note, a letter, a threatening note, a letter saying, don't speak. I claim privilege. And if you speak, I will come after you. Right. So she's retained counsel. And she's retained great counsel. There is no privilege. You'll find out that there'll be a legal decision by the eminent Supreme Court Justice Cromwell that say there is no privilege, does not lie here.
You know, Manny, you're so right. Of course she's received a letter saying you don't say a word. I bet that letter was written, if not by Gerald Butts, by maybe a Justice Department lawyer saying you hush up. Because it is, I've heard people say, Trudeau was not the client. I mean, it's not a personal relationship.
Absolutely not.
And I think he was blabbing. I think he provoked her yesterday when he said, the fact she's still in cabinet, that tells you all you need to know. Right. I met with her twice. Exactly. What's the problem? I mean, I think that was too much for her. You talk about the new Attorney General, David Lametti, who's a law professor from McGill, actually from the exact same constituency where SNC Lavalin is headquartered. Right. I want to play a short clip from over the weekend where Evan Solomon of CTV did a really good job of just sort of shining a light on the fact that Lametti has shown a tremendous lack of curiosity, Manny, that his only source of info, if I'm listening to this clip correctly, he didn't ask the Prime Minister tough questions. He didn't ask Gerald Butts tough questions. He didn't even talk to his predecessor, Jody Wilson-Raybould. He just watched the news and said, Trudeau said he didn't do anything wrong. That's good enough for me. Here, take a quick look at this clip.
How can you say with any degree of certainty that there was no pressure put on her if you don't know? Who told you there was no pressure?
The Prime Minister has said publicly, and I'm basing. The Prime Minister said that the allegations contained in the Globe and Mail article were false. The Prime Minister has said that he did not direct my predecessor, so I'm basing it on what he has said publicly.
Okay, but you're a Justice Minister. Is that what he said he didn't direct? Is he skating using legal language around the idea that there's pressure, that there's room? He may have pressured her in other ways, the Prime Minister's office. Are you 100% confident that there was no pressure in any way, shape, or form? I
can't speak to a relationship that I wasn't privy to. That's clear. But what I can repeat to you and to Canadians is what the Prime Minister has said.
Manny, just out of curiosity, I mean, just out of due diligence, just out of meticulousness, wouldn't you ask a question? I don't know anyone who would say, oh yeah, I saw some guy on TV, he said he didn't do it. So that's like, that's the top legal officer in Canada saying just some political soundbites good enough for him. There's nothing to see here. That was cringeworthy.
Well, that is actually more egregious to what he's doing to the administration of justice than the alleged obstruction of justice that may have happened at the PMO. The fact that we have the Attorney General, when you have a serious issue raised, you have a minister that was fired from her job, a minister that's not retired, and not investigate. I mean, I simply put it to this. I think I did a tweet toward there will be no crime in Canada if that's the standard of the Attorney General. Yeah. If all the accused has to say is it never happened and no further investigation about the victims or anyone else, there are no crimes in Canada. We have solved all crimes in Canada because all you need is the accused to say nothing happened. Yeah. It is egregious. I am dumbfounded that I'm also embarrassed that he's an Italian. I'm an Italian lawyer, and I tell you, every lawyer there is unanimity on this with Liberals, conservatives, anybody that practiced law or has been in law is offended by this. Yeah. How this one lawyer that's now the Attorney General, and who was a professor, I might add, it is appalling what he's doing. This David Lametti, I don't know how he could be sleeping at night, watching what's going on, especially when you have the ethics commissioner. The ethics commissioner has no teeth. That legislation, he can't do anything but investigate and say, I found wrong. Yeah. The Attorney General has available to him the Crown's Department, the RCMP, the resources, and the criminal code. He chooses not to use that and let the ethics commissioner do the work. It is embarrassing and appalling that the justice in Canada is not being done, and our Attorney General is simply not doing what a first-year law student would know what to do.
Hey, can I ask you a question about David Lametti? Because I was going through the federal lobbyist registry. So when SNC Lavalin was making its rounds on Parliament Hill, they met with a lot of people, and I should say I think lobbying is okay. I think it's a fancy way of saying bringing something to the attention of a politician. I think there's some people that just out of good judgment maybe a politician should never meet with. But if you're the president of a major company, I think it's probably okay for someone to meet you. But they lobbied David Lametti personally about 18 months ago. And here's the copy of that communication report. He was parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Industry at the time. But they had a private meeting with him about 1.5 years ago. And, maybe that's fine. In fact, I don't think that's a problem itself. But here's the question. If they convinced him of something, if they persuaded him of something, if he agreed to go to bat for them, if he agreed to pass on a message for them, if he took any notes on that, I think that's all relevant to whether or not it's good enough for him to say, oh, I see nothing, I hear nothing. Because if he would have said to them in any way, you guys make a good case, or I didn't know what to think, but you've changed my mind on this, or I promise I'll pass on a message to Jody Wilson-Raybould. If he would have indicated at all that his heart was moved by them, wouldn't that be a reason that the world could say, well, you're biased, Mr. Lametti. You indicated that you were on their side, and now you've moved from just someone who was lobbied to sort of a decision maker, and that's inappropriate. You should recuse yourself. What do you think of that, Manny?
Yeah, absolutely. You don't have to, Ezra, you don't have to get into whether there was bias or not. There's a simple apprehension of bias. Once you meet with someone, and now you're the Attorney General, and I guess he got this job as Attorney General. He never knew that when he was lobbied by SNC. And that lobbying was proper and it was right. And I agree with you. And of course, every MP should be able to meet with anybody. But once you are now put in the position of Attorney General and you're dealing with the issue of obstruction of justice, and you had been lobbied, you have only one duty, and that is to recuse yourself from this file or step down as Attorney General. You can't deal with it. Now, the great odd is the Prime Minister had that very same problem, and he was found to be guilty of the Ethics Act for not recusing himself when he stood and gave a chunk of money to a person that he took a $200,000 gift from. Yeah. It's very simple. He shouldn't be in the room. Mm-hmm. If you're going to take a $200,000 gift, don't be in the room when you're giving someone $20 million. That's very simply understood. Yeah. And Lametti must know that the moment he became Attorney General and this file hit his door and he was made Attorney General on this file, he should have said to the Prime Minister, no, I can't become Attorney General because I met and I have to recuse myself. And I'm sure they had that discussion. And I'm sure they said, forget about it. Jeez. You don't have to worry about recusing. Go ahead and save me.
You know, I saw that the PMO and their message repeaters were saying, oh, the Ethics Commissioner is looking into this. I sense that is their way of saying, well, we know that the Ethics Commissioner doesn't have all the teeth of other possible inquiries. Doesn't have the power or the resources of the RCMP.
Right.
Doesn't have, like, you're not going to have a wiretap by the ethics commissioner. You might have that if you're the RCMP. You're not, so it's their way of saying, okay, who's the weakest, tamest judge there is, and even if they convict, it'll be a $200 fine and a little embarrassment. So I think they looked and said, oh, we're in deep trouble here. I mean, these SNC Lavalin is being prosecuted for paying $48 million in bribes. So we're already in heavy criminal territory here. And they said, oh, just give it to the kindergarten cop. Give it to the gentlest of all. And to me, it looks like they're saying, well, let's preempt an RCMP investigation. Remember, it was the cops who went after Mike Duffy.
Right.
And that was, whatever you think of Mike Duffy, they brought in the full police squad. Here, Trudeau just wants some baby cop to take it on. I think I think that shows that he's trying to damage control.
Absolutely. I mean, there's no question about it. This does not belong in the ethics commissioner's hands. This is not about ethics. This is about saving Canada's a judicial system, saving Canada's rule of law. The ethics commissioner is the least person equipped to do that. This is probably one of the most serious charges you can have, obstruction of justice. It is so serious, Ezra, that we have 2 Canadians in jail in China because we have said to China, we removed a ambassador to China, McCallum. Right. We have said to the world that the rule of law of Canada is so important that Canadians can perish in jail in China because rule of law is everything. We understand that. And while he said that, in 2 instances, at least right now, one was, of course, what we have before us right now, which is the SNC Lavalin, whether there was obstruction of justice. And the second one is by Judge Perkin McVeigh, who said in open court that, well, there goes the independence of the Crown Prosecution Office because it was influenced by the PMO, and this is in the Norman trial case. We have 2 trials or 2 situations where the Prime Minister's, allegedly the Prime Minister's office is obstructing justice, and we have Canadians, Ezra, and I said this to my wife, my heart goes out to the Canadians that are caught in jail because of this Prime Minister who has now made it very clear that he has obstructed and he will, and China is looking at this and saying, this is an absolute joke, this government.
Yeah. You know, Manny, you refer to the case that's going on in Atlantic Canada right now. We haven't gone deep on it on this show, so just to remind our viewers, here's a story in the CBC called Norman's Defense accuses Trudeau PMO of attempting to direct prosecution. And that quote you mentioned by Judge Heather Perkins McVeigh, she said, so much for the independence of the PPSC. That stands for the Public Prosecution Service of Canada. So a judge is saying that. Just a quick reminder, it's a Vice Admiral of the Navy, Mark Norman, who has been blamed, who has been charged with leaking confidential material. And as his legal defense goes deeper and deeper, it is clear that there were political machinations to blame him. Scott Bryson resigned from cabinet. A lot of people think so I think it's fair to say that Trudeau has now lost 2 cabinet ministers over this interference in judicial matters. That's crazy.
There's a third aspect to Ezra that I want to bring to your attention, and that is obstruction of the defense of a vice admiral. The defense counsel is trying to obtain documents, and it's been obstructed by the PMO, and they're not delivering documents, and they're subpoenaing it through a judge. Now, I do not understand for the life of me how the government of Canada is holding documents that may assist the defense of a vice admiral. And the defense counsel has to fight. You may recall during the Duffy case, and the Duffy case was $90,000 worth of expenses that were paid back. Not only did everyone cooperate, the PMO's office cooperate with the Crown's office, but the Prime Minister waived his privilege in order to get all the information before the courts to assist the courts. We have obstruction after obstruction after obstruction with this PMO government.
It's incredible. Manny, I tell you, I could talk with you all day about this, but I know you've got to go. I want to raise one last thing.
Sure.
And it's about Jody Wilson-Raybould herself. I disagreed with her on certain policy matters, as one would expect. She's a liberal, I'm not. But I have to say, I think you accurately said it. It's quite something to watch her stand up for the rule of law from an Anglo-Saxon legal tradition.
Right.
She's an Aboriginal activist, as was her dad, but she believes enough in the law that she wasn't willing to bend to Trudeau's political demands. If what we think is happening here is what's happening here. I want to ask you or point out one last thing and get your comment on it. I mentioned that in her resignation letter, she signed it Puglas, P-U-G-L-A-S,
right,
which is an Aboriginal name I think that her grandma gave her. So it's very, now her English name is underneath that, but it's sort of resonating that she's doing this for the generations. She's doing this out of some deep, I thought that was a very interesting touch. And her dad, who was a political activist in his day too, who went head to head with Justin Trudeau's dad, Pierre Trudeau, her dad isn't bound by any confidentiality. He's Facebooking up a storm on this, and he says, finally, Jody will be able to speak honestly, and we're fighting. I think that Justin Trudeau loves appointing quotas and tokens to cabinet. He says so himself. He boasts about how many of this race and that gender, and in many cases, they are just tokens. They'll do whatever he says just to cling on to power. But I think the beautiful, delicious, poetic, karmic irony here, Manny, is that the ultimate box checker, women, check, Aboriginal, check, West Coast, check, progressive, check, actually turned out to be the one who believed in things so deeply that she refused to be just window dressing. And Trudeau doesn't know how to fight that because he's used to emoting and affirmative action and progress. She is actually a woman of principle, it seems to me, and he doesn't even know how to fight her. What do you think of that?
No, absolutely. And there is another woman of principle, Leona, that crossed the floor. There are great women on both sides of the aisle, and the great ones stand up and they speak to truth and speak to power. And we've seen two from the Liberal side. It's very hard. I suspect there's more that's going to happen. I will say one thing that I'm very proud of Puglas's father. I am a dad of a very strong, a bright, brilliant woman, and she is combative. She is strong, and I could see that if it was my daughter and she was in that situation, she would stand up strong, and I would be by her side. So I give great kudos to dad stepping up, and you know, there's no greater bond than a dad and a daughter. It could never be. It could never be outdone by the faux feminism of the Prime Minister. He didn't understand that great relationship, and I'm glad to see it played out. I saw his Facebook statements. He's a tough man, a tough dad, and tough men and tough dads with tough daughters don't get pushed around by fake feminists.
Wow, that's a really nice way to end our conversation, Manny. You're so right on that. I should note that Trudeau was scheduled to have press conferences. The time has been moving, so we're recording this before Trudeau's final press conference. Who knows, it might not even happen today, but we'll be sure to follow the story in the days ahead. Manny, as always, thank you so much for providing
no problem, Ezra.
Political and legal point of view. It's just great, and we look forward to talking to you again.
Great, thanks a lot, Ezra.
All right, that's our friend Manny Montenegrino, former chairman of a national law firm, former lawyer to Prime Minister Stephen Harper, and the CEO of Think Sharp. That's an excerpt from the Ezra Levant show. Every day I do a video monologue and then I interview an interesting guest, and then I end by reading my hate mail. But you've got to subscribe to it, which you can do at therebel.media/shows.